My Lords, I rise specifically to support Amendment 171F, excellently motivated by the noble Baroness Morris of Yardley and backed up by others. But just firstly a comment on this whole group of amendments and what interesting speeches we've heard in relation to them. I think lurking behind some of the frustrations of this bill is an absence about the content of education, the content of the curriculum, the whole question of what education is for. And I regret that we aren't spending more time on the substance of schooling rather than the structures and systems. And I think that these speeches indicate that people want to talk about something that's not in the bill, which is education, which is the point of schools, after all. But one trend that we have seen over recent years is a tendency to see schools instrumentally as a means to address social, economic and cultural problems, which I worry squeezes out a focus on knowledge for its own sake, which is my particular hobby horse. But regardless, because that's led to an ever-expanding demand on teachers to solve a myriad of social, non-educational problems, I fear that it is stirring up tensions between the distinct division of labour between schools and families, a sort of mission creep that often makes parents feel that teachers are encroaching into areas such as values that are either politicised or at odds with their own values. And I think that lies behind some of the tensions that have emerged around the Amendment 171F. At the very least, this expanded remit has dragged teachers into some highly contentious arenas that they now need to teach. Even hearing the contributions on British values in this debate, I mean, one could argue and argue and argue over these things, and there have been arguments. So it's a question about whether schools are the places where these should be fought out. Just to use a couple of examples, I know from a number of head teachers and senior teachers that I know that there was something of a panic after the Black Lives Matters moment, when teachers were told that they had to decolonise the curriculum in the wake of the murder of George Floyd in 2020. And also in relation to the 2019 government extension of relationship with sex education, lots of senior teachers sitting around saying, well, this isn't just teaching biology. They're aware it's a toxic topic these days. It's not just something you can send in the teaching staff to. They know it goes far broader than science or facts. And the solution has been to bring in outside experts, third parties, NGOs, with their ready-made materials. But I think there's a real problem here. That's actually undermining the professionalism of teachers. Because these teachers, these experts rather, can be used to train governors, teachers, directly to run workshops for pupils, supply materials, as we heard. But when you look at who's doing it, some of them at least are partisan political activists who embrace one-sided ideological approaches to contentious issues. They aren't trained as teacher trainers, they're not accredited, and there's no central regulation. Now, you'd think from this schools bill, in which, as many people have noted, it's such a centralising power grab that it's likely to squeeze the life out of school autonomy, that the government might be all over a situation where there's all sorts of people going into schools and teaching things and nobody knows what they're teaching. And on this issue, however, the DfE seems to themselves be washing their hands of it, saying it's up to schools to vet third-party providers. But I think without clear guidelines, it's hard for schools to navigate around what are, if we're really honest, contentious culture war issues. I mean, I don't know whether ministers have looked at the resources produced by some external organisations, but please do go through the research provided by Transgender Trends or the Safe Schools Alliance, because it really is more gender ideology than facts. You know, pronouns for primary school kids, etc., etc. I won't rehearse it. I think that the excuse might be that it's commercially sensitive, but actually I think often what's going on here is that things are politically sensitive. These aren't benign ideas, let alone facts. They're often divisive, totally at odds with parents, often going against their values, and certainly fall short of statutory requirements for teacher impartiality. So I was struck during the, just to move on to a different subject, so it's not all gender, during the lockdown, when Channel 4 showed the documentary the school that tried to end racism, involving 11 and 12-year-olds in a school in South London. And many parents I knew were horrified to discover the use of pseudo-scientific implicit association testing, and then the splitting of classrooms into white and non-white affinity groups, all through the prism of critical race theory. A campaign group that I was involved in setting up at the time, Don't Divide Us, then was drowning with concerned parents asking what was going on and asking if their kids were being taught that all white people are racist. Parents went into schools to ask if they could see the materials being used, even though some of the time that was dodging lockdowns, and they were basically told that there was nothing to see here, to go away, treated as a nuisance. And when a group of parents led by DDU challenged Brighton and Hove Council about its racial literacy 101 materials for schools, they were constantly rebuffed. Eventually, what was revealed showed some shockers. For example, under the heading Overt and Covert White Supremacy, lynching was listed alongside colour blindness, a shocking slur against generations of civil rights and anti-racist activists who took Martin Luther King's mantra that we should judge on the content of character, not on skin colour. No longer, it seems. My final point is actually that when you actually get to see some of the teaching materials, that point about Martin Luther King's position is actually dismissed as old-fashioned, and what pupils are being often told is that parents are the problem, that they're old-fashioned, they're backward, and I think that this is something we need to be very wary of. Parents who, for example, go along with colour blindness are described as exhibiting unconscious bias. Those parents who believe in the biological facts of sex, or, rather than the fluidity of gender identity, are labelled to their own children as bigots and transphobic, guilty of cisnormity. So I just think that the government has a responsibility here to diffuse what could become quite a nasty set of tensions. And potentially one of the ways of ensuring that this breach of trust, potentially between teachers, between schools and parents, would be more transparency. So I really think there's a no-brainer for the government. They should ensure that the spirit of Amendment 171F goes flying through and is part of the bill.